welcome to the second day of Translating Europe Forum.
A very good morning to all of you, and good morning to those of you who are watching us in cyberspace.
So many of you here in the room so early on a Friday morning. Thank you for making the effort. For those of you who weren't following us yesterday, my name is Aminda Lee. I'm a British and Italian journalist and moderator with a small translation agency specializing in audiovisual translation.
And my name is Nicolas Fröhlicher, a former professional translator, founder of a small translation agency, and these days I'm responsible for the ILTS Masters Language and Specialized Translation industry at the University of Paris. And today I will be speaking as a member of the EMT network and of its board.
Packed program for you, as you may have seen already, with plenty of plenary sessions, parallel sessions, and a final keynote speech. But before we start, we'd like to remind you of the usual few practical points. Please make sure that your mobile phones are on silent, but keep them handy because we'll be doing some more Slido activities today with polling. You can send in your questions. You need to use the event code 2019 TEF, and that's also the same as the Twitter hashtag. Let's see if we can get back to #1 in Belgium trending topic today. That would be nice. If you want to log into the Wi-Fi, the code is on your badges, and there will be doing activities all the way through the morning. I'm now going to leave you in Nicolas' capable hands. He's going to give a short overview of the translation industry worldwide.
Merci.
Thank you, Aminda. I'll be very brief because I think I've only got 3 minutes available to give you some figures about the situation and the translation market in Europe. The first thing that you have to remember when we present figures, there are always approximations or generalities. Now, one can say that there are 7,111 living languages spoken in the world. You have to perhaps then think about what a language really is, how you define it. But this is the following breakdown. I'll go very quickly through the first few slides. What's interesting, I think, is to see the mother tongues. You've got China in first place, and then you've got the list after that in front of you. Now, in the European Union, there are around 90 native languages, including over 60 indigenous regional minority languages. Now, when we say 90 languages, we're not counting languages connected to migration. We had statistics which say that in a city like Brussels, there are about 300 languages being spoken, and there's a good bit of work there for translators. Now, as you know, the European Union has 24 official languages, and you can see here at what stage each one became an official language. What's more interesting for us, or at least as interesting for us, is to see that 46% of the European population only speaks one language. So there we can see clearly the need for translation, and I think that means that what we call in English the language industry, including all of its various trades, is serving literally billions of people who are either monolingual or plurilingual in various different sectors, which I'm not going to detail for you. You know them anyway. We've talked about them all through yesterday. Now, what is important is that it's a sector which is major in terms of its turnover and which is growing. According to statistics, there are around 1,650 translation companies in the world, and the turnover is roughly 48 billion euros in 2018 worldwide. That's quite a lot. And what's even more interesting is that we've got a growth rate of around about 7% per year measured over the last 10 years. And that means that the size of the industry sector has doubled in terms of turnover between 2009 and 2018. And that means that, well, if you ask how many translators there are in the world, that I think is a sensitive question, but the statistics that we have bring us to around about 400,000 if you're going to take a broad definition of the industry, and 250,000 full-time jobs in the core of the profession, namely professional translators, interpreters, and subtitlers and dubbers worldwide. As you all know, this isn't a completely balanced profession in terms of gender. Around about 70% are women and 30% are men in the profession. And I think that's mirrored in our own assembly. Now, around about half of this economic activity can be found taking place in Europe, and that's not completely by chance. And here again, we're talking about trends. It seems that 70% of European language professionals are expecting to see their activities grow in the foreseeable future. Now, translators have often been quite pessimistic for a long time, and we heard traces of that pessimism in the Slido surveys yesterday, notably the first one. Now, should one be pessimistic? Well, perhaps not. The figures would seem to prove the opposite. Now, let me just move on to the growing importance of technological tools with this slide that you can find in any case on the forum's website. Now, this breaks down the various tools that are used, classified by turnover, and I'm going to finish this very quick presentation by inviting you to take a longer period of time to really savor these questions. And given that we're going to talk about technology, it's my pleasure to invite Jörgen GREN to take his place on the stage, and I'm going to hand over to him, and he's going to chair our first session.
Merci beaucoup, Nicolas. Merci.
Thank you very much, Nicolas.
Très difficile de passer.
Well, it's very difficult to go after you've made such a great presentation.
English, if that's okay with everybody. So, my name is Jörgen GREN. I'm Director of Resources in DGT. Just very quickly, you can see my bio in the different material that you have in front of you. But very quickly, I was working with the digital single market for the past 5 years, which brings us perhaps to a very good panel here about tech insights and how interesting this panel will actually be. I was very excited about this panel. I flipped out my LinkedIn and I started to invite frenetically everybody on the panel straight away, because there was such a good panel, I thought, and such a wide range of different things that we will listen to about today. Speech to text, convergence of interpretation and translation was a very interesting kind of title. Optimal and suboptimal workflow, something we are all struggling with, and Europe's role in language technology and different breakthroughs. As you may know, DGT is very much leading when it comes to machine translation and technology development. We cover all of the different official languages. We perform well with our e-translation system in competition worldwide. We can be quite proud of this. We had 1 million pages in October being translated with e-translation in one single day, and this is a very specialized type of document, or specialized documents, very limited user group. So we can be proud of our quality when it comes to translation, but we can be equally proud also of the e-translation that we have in the European Commission. But demand is growing for translation. This was very much shown in the slides before me. It's actually a success story. Multilingualism, understanding, access to information, all of this is very good. and it comes out to machine translation, it comes out to technology, and it's helping all of these different dimensions. But, of course, the profession is changing. New technology, breakthroughs, this all demands new skills and upskilling. But enough about this. Now let's go on to the panel, and I'd like to call all the panelists up, and we can perhaps have a seat together. Here, I'll sit on the side. And we will start discussing here today. We will also have Slido, a few quick housekeeping rules. You will have 15 minutes each, and I've been told to be very, very strict with you, so please respect the 15 minutes so that we have a good discussion, and also a little bit of Slido and some polling that will come up. And I have a look at Lukács over there at the very end, so he will make signs to me when we have something interesting that we can come up. But let's start with Ondřej. So Ondřej BOJAR, please have a seat or stand up as you wish. He comes from the Institute of Formal and Applied Linguistics of the Charles University. Ondřej, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So good morning again. Thank you for the introduction. And I'll try to both show all the slides that I've prepared and speak slowly at the same time. So that will be hard. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm coming from the computer science area. And today I would like to talk about a European project that I'm coordinating, which is called ELITER, or European Live Translator. The project has aims which are at the frontiers of speech and document translation. Let's go into that. First, to make sure that I use only the abbreviations that you know, these are the abbreviations in our project. ASR is automated speech recognition, so that's the conversion from the voice signal to text, and then MT is machine translation. And the combination of those would be spoken language translation, or SLT. And there you don't have to write down the source language in text at all. So that's the technologies. And yesterday at the last panel of the day, Christian Federmann from Microsoft already mentioned the human parity thing, and Microsoft had its 3 claims on beating humans in speech recognition, in machine translation, and then also in speech synthesis. When it's companies who are presenting how good the technology is, you always have to have this grain of salt, but I know Christian Federmann from the shared task that I'll be mentioning later on, and he's very serious, and they are not making any false statements. It's just that people often misread these messages. So for the ASR, for the speech recognition, this is a slide from something else. I was always doing machine translation, and I've started with speech recognition only at the beginning of this year. But this is some standard test set, 2 random native English speakers making phone calls, and the curve going down is the error of the automated system. And you see that it reaches levels of 4 or 6% of word error rate, which is essentially edit distance that you may know. And that has happened 2 years ago. So we see a great progress. This is one particular test set. So how is it with machine translation? Is really machine translation surpassing humans? I would like to point out that comparing or evaluating the quality of machine translation is much harder than evaluating the quality of speech recognition, because there is hundreds of thousands of correct translations of single sentences. We have papers on that. It's very easy to come up with different translations. You all know that. You would probably guess there are like dozens of translations per sentence. No, it's thousands at least. So how do you choose which one of them is the better one? Okay, so what there is this is a whole area of our science, evaluating machine translation, and we are changing the ways to get the best what we can from that. So the thing that we are using these days in the recent years is that's something which is called a direct assessment. It's obviously not perfect, but it can be run bilingually. So what you are doing then is you are showing the people the source sentence and some translation. And it's always like the sentence by sentence evaluation. And the annotator sees this and clicks on that slider at the bottom of that image to indicate how good the translation is putting together, aggregating all the errors that are possibly there. After about 15 such judgments, the annotator kind of sets the scale and the numbers start to be reproducible to some extent. And if you collect many of these judgments, you can sort of trust them. Obviously, this lumps together many different aspects, and there are many reasons why we don't like it, but you can at least compare systems on some single scale. And the good thing about this bilingual evaluation is that you can also put in the sentences translated by humans into the same setup. And if you do not tell the people whether this is machine translation or the humans, you can kind of compare who translated better. So we did that for English to Czech translation in 2018. We did it also before. And our system was significantly better than the professional translation. So that's the horizontal line between the SUNY transformer, the Charles University system, and the second rank, which is the system of University of Edinburgh, and professional translators, which are indistinguishable according to this evaluation measure. There must be a catch, and there is one. The catch is that the humans translated the whole documents, and our machine translation systems operated at individual sentences. And the evaluation also ran at individual sentences. And if you are evaluating a sentence without the document context, a sentence which is well fit for the document context might not sound so natural if it's evaluated in isolation. So we changed the evaluation from year to year. This year we were showing the sentences one by one, not randomly, but in the original order of the document. And then I'm sorry to say that humans won again in English to Czech. Unlike in English to German. So in English to German, again, there is a horizontal rule which kind of indicates that there was even some statistical significance observed, and one system was significantly better than a bulk of many other systems. Notice there is like 10 lines written, and there is 10 more systems in the pack on the right-hand side. And all these are indistinguishable, and they are indistinguishable from the human translation as well. So that shows how much competition is there, and how everybody is pushing on the frontier. So the main message to take from this is we cannot really claim that we are better than humans, by no means, but we can say that we are in some types of evaluation, we are on par with them. It can happen that we are indistinguishable in some number of languages. This doesn't come out of the blue. There is some tradition, there is some history, there is more than a decade of these shared tasks, this WMT. It's, people sometimes call it competitions, but that's not the point to win. The point is to put the best ideas in and see what other teams did as their best ideas, and then next year you combine these best ideas. So it's like a friendly competition, if at least. And what we are, as the organizers of this shared task, we are not happy about the public announcements that are being made based on the results here, because we know all the limitations of the evaluation measures, and the journalists and the public don't know these caveats, and it's very dangerous to interpret the results without the full context. But you see that both Czech and German have been covered for that decade, while Spanish was stopped in 2013 and French in 2015 because they were too easy, apparently. It's also related to the funding, obviously. And I'm very grateful to the European Commission because the Czech and German presence, and actually the task as a whole, would never have so long history if there was not this continued support in a row of European projects. So this is always 3-year projects, but the projects are linked to one another and proceed. So I'm now coordinating one of those. That's the Research and Innovation Action European Live Translator, or ELITER. And we have 3 main goals, and some of the goals are kind of the research side, so doing new things that are hard, and some of the goals are innovation, which means the technology is kind of there. It has been prototyped, but it has not been put to practice sufficiently well. So there is still some work to be done in order to apply that technology. So we are focusing on machine and speech translation, but in a highly multilingual setting. So from 6 languages, we go to like 43 target languages, if we get the data for them. Then for machine translation, we're focusing on the translation of the whole document, so exactly the coherence across sentences. And the very research part is automatic summarization of meetings, which we call minuting. And this is something which has not been established as a task. In the picture that you saw at the beginning, the ASR and MT are the innovation part. This should be easy. they are not, obviously. And spoken language translation is something which still has to be researched, and the minuting, the summarization of the meetings is something which is very new. Yeah, so we did a like reality check. In March, we ran our systems on a fair of student firms, mock companies. I forgot to clear out copyright reasons, copyright or pay royalties for one of the videos, so I cannot show the video that I had prepared for this session. But there is a video that you can find on our site, eliter.eu, and then in the blog there is a link to that. And what we found out that the ASR error rate was supposed to be 4 to 6% with the best system. So 4 out of 100 words wrong. In our setting, non-native high school students speaking in a noisy environment, the word error rate was 40 to 50 for our system in the project from Karlsruhe. And commercial systems and other systems were much better, like 90% error rate, which means 1 word out of 10 is actually recognized correctly. And the example here, I'm not going to read that, that example shows the best recognized segment. And you see that at the end, the correct transcript says something that a store that deals with the sale of free time footwear that was recognized as free down food to hour or free time food to hour and so on. So this is the input for the machine translation. And if you are translating this, then obviously, well, non-intelligible text will come out of that. So we did another reality check, and that was for the full documents. So this is the system that won the evaluation in 2018. So that's the system that sentence by sentence surpassed humans, and that system was trained for news. So we put it out of domain slightly, and we, because in the project we have a partner, the Supreme Audit Office of the Czech Republic, we put there the audit reports, the fun reports of audits. And this is very hard domain to evaluate. We, as native speakers of Czech, could not assess it because we don't know whether a taxpayer and the payer of the VAT tax are interchangeable terms. That's something which only domain experts know. So we had these outputs evaluated by the workers, the officers of the audit institution. And on the other hand, they are not linguists, so they could be less picky about the quality of the sentences. So we asked them to score the systems and also the human translation using the scales which are used at the GCSE exam, at the final exams of the second grade of studies in the Czech Republic. So these are roughly the criteria. I'm not going to go into any details here, but the message is that the reference was very often on par in the same brackets as the best system, except for language resources, spelling and morphology, where it was below the system. So humans were indistinguishable according to these measures from the machine translation system, except for making more spelling errors. Yeah. So that was one reality check. So that's the news systems, and they are perfect for translating audit reports. So we did another reality check, and that was let's translate another full document, an agreement. And it's very hard to get hold of agreements. So actually the agreement here, the English is my English, because I was like the one to donate that agreement, and we'll had it translated back to Czech. So this is legalese. This would be hard to read in your native, in your mother tongue as well. And this is its translation, automated translation into Czech, which I guess nobody can understand. So I'll just highlight what happened here. So it says things like, it's a sublease agreement, and it says that the tenant on the one hand side and the tenant on the other hand side have agreed to do so the tenant and tenant have closed up this agreement that the tenant will lease the apartment to the tenant, and you and you see that this translation is
just a few minutes left.
I know. Okay. Yeah. And you see that this is very bad. It's totally useless translation. You have to correct every single term in there. So here is my recipe for miracles to happen. You need to define a task, you need to provide training data and test data, and you need to run this competition or shared task, and you repeat that for a number of years. And the WMT does this for machine translation for more than a decade, and so does IWSLT, International Workshop on Spoken Language Translation. And I would like our project to start this for meeting summarization. So for that, I'm actually asking for data. we would like to get any kind of business meetings or project meetings that can be recorded and that have some minutes. And if you have this collection of data, if you prepare it in a nice setting as a shared task, if you let the best universities compete in that, the solution will appear. So if you are bored in taking minutes, please donate data to us, send us an email at info.eliter.eu, and after a couple of years, I cannot predict the speed of development here. This is a hard task. It has not been clearly defined yet. This is still the research work to be done. But after we define the task, after we have enough training data, the deep neural networks will manage. The artificial intelligence will just do that. So here's the summary. I think that shared tasks are the driver of technological progress, and that's absolutely critical. In ASR and machine translation, we see the quality of humans being reached in specific settings. The final output quality of machine translation totally heavily varies according to the domain and other settings. So it's excellent for general text with no special terminology, such as news or these audit reports. It's very good if the texts are general and the morphology is and the terminology is limited. Or if you have relevant training data for that, and it can be total disaster for any document which has its own terminology, which introduces the terminology, such as the agreements. For speech translation, there is very specific problems. It's extremely sensitive to the input quality, which I can illustrate just by this. Imagine that you have a system, and here it depends on centimeters how far I'm from that mic, and it should catch up with that. Then all the accents issues and the internal compatibility of the components. So if you have separate ASR and separate MT, the punctuation can kill it and produce a bad output. If you want your task solved, please provide the data. And the example I was giving is meeting recordings and minutes for the ELITE project. Thank you.
And now if I can, thank you very much, very interesting, data, 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 and also as a currency as well, by the way. Can I call Claudio FANTINUOLI from the University of Mainz to talk about speech recognition and the potential convergence of translation and interpretation.
So, thank you very much. I will talk about a very marginal technology from the perspective of translators or interpreters. My main concern is how technology can be used by translators and interpreters. And this technology is automatic speech recognition. I will start with a very general introduction about speech recognition. My talk won't be very technical at all. Then I will see the potential use of automatic speech recognition in written translation, in interpreting, and in a convergent profession, if you want. Let's start about some very general thought about automatic speech recognition. One has to say that this is one of the technology that has been mostly studied in natural language processing in history, together with machine translation. We always think about machine translation, but automatic speech recognition has a very long history of study, of research, and many important personality of the digital area, let's say, have studied and have worked in this area. I always give an example of Ray Kurzweil, which is now the head of technology by Google, and it grew up, if you want, also with developing automatic speech translation. For the one who doesn't know how it works, I won't go in detail, as I said, but it's important to understand that it's just not translation, if you want, of acoustic signal in words, but behind it there are much more which is happening now, which is language knowledge, if you want, linguistic knowledge that is used to produce a sensible, a good recognition, a good transcription of the spoken words. And this is quite important to know. Another point which is important to know is that in some areas speech recognition is considered as a solved task. In some areas, it needs to be underlined because we have seen before that there are still problems and limits. But in the research areas, we are moving away from just studying speech recognition to studying particular areas of speech recognition. For example, when people have an accent, which is a bit of a problem, or for impaired people, there are a lot of studies trying to make speech recognition also available for impaired people. The word that comes to mind is accessibility. And from a technical point of view, speech recognition is moving towards real-time, continuous speech recognition, so it's immediate there without latency, more or less, a very small latency. With a very small memory footprint, so you can have it on your mobile phone without having to rely to a server connection, which is what is happening most of the time now when you use Alexa or Google or the other softwares for speech recognition. You are connected with a server which is providing you back transcription. And the direction which is taken now is to make it more small and available on devices, small devices on a normal computer. The revolution, I don't have to repeat this, started more or less in 2012. We were seeing before the increasing of precision of speech recognition, which has now reached a very high level. Very nice to know is that this system of deep learning, of machine learning, are learning just by exposure to data, a bit like children do when they are learning to understand acoustically, understand the language. So there is a lot of similarities to human learning, which is a very fascinating topic, also for non-technical people. We have seen that the error rates are very slow, and that now it's user independent. You know, you have Alexa, many of you have Alexa or other gadget like this in your home, and we are starting to see speech recognition used on an everyday basis in many areas, and it's working quite well. So let's see how we can use speech recognition in translation. It's quite interesting. There are very few studies in these areas, but there are some of them. We know that speech recognition is everywhere, but almost no tools for translators are using speech recognition. There are some exceptions, but it's not very popular. However, we have seen that, there are three areas in a translation where we can use speech recognition. The first is very easy, is to command the computer, the software, to do things. Again, accessibility for impaired people. The other is, of course, to dictate our translation instead of typing it. And then a very small area is to prepare the text for translation, for example, in multimedia and films and so on. These are the three areas where speech recognition can be used in a translation. And it's quite interesting because speech recognition is everywhere, but it's not used. And some studies have demonstrated that there are some advantages in using speech recognition also for translators in productivity. We know productivity is not everything, but it's a part of our business. And other studies, very recent studies, have demonstrated that translators are quite happy if they are confronted with speech recognition while translating, but with some exceptions, because some problems, there are errors that cause a bit of, in some cases, the necessity for the translator to change the way they speak, which is not often seen as a very very nice thing. Or there is a little bit less ergonomic, because if you are not dictating continuous speech, but just small segments, and that it's a bit problematic for speech recognition and for the interaction with a CAT tool. In interpreting, that's another area which is emerging, the use of speech recognition. Probably it's more natural to think about interpreting than a translation when you're speaking about speech recognition. Is the idea to use speech recognition to support, for example, the simultaneous interpreters with the K tools, computer-assisted interpreted tools. And what's the idea that the speech recognition, the machine is listening, like the interpreter, to my speech, and prompt the interpreter with what I call the unit of interests, such as terminology, numbers, and named entities names, to help interpreters simultaneously to provide a better and more precise rendition of a speech. This can work in two modes. The speech recognition is listening, the computer is just prompting everything which is considered of interest for these three areas. Or the more advances which are studied now, for example, in the last point by Vogler and other researchers, is to use machine learning to predict when the interpreter will have some difficulties while interpreting, statistically predicted, and prompting the interpreter just with this information, just in case the interpreter may have difficulties. This is to lower the cognitive load for the interpreter, because, you know, interpreter is quite a demanding task happening lifetime. I show you a video of a short video of an example of an experiment we've done with speech recognition for interpreters.
The euro area economy has now been growing for 5 years, and we expect the expansion to continue in the coming years. We've recently seen a loss of growth momentum. In both of the last two quarterly ECB growth projections, our staff has revised down its estimates. Actual data have also been weak. The flash estimate for euro area growth in the first quarter was just 0.2%. The slowdown has raised questions about the strength of the growth outlook, and in turn, whether the ongoing convergence of inflation towards our objective will be sustained. I would like to address these questions in my remarks this morning.
I hope it's finished at some point. Yes. As you see, this is a live video, a recorded video, where the interpreter gets suggestions for translations and for numbers, which are considered for simultaneous interpreters, for terminology numbers, which are considered quite complicated to interpret. It happens in more or less real time with a very small latency, and this is like a booth made for the interpreter if he needs such translation. And it's working quite well. We have done researches, and for our triggers, for example, in interpreting, we're seeing the precision. In this case, it's Google speech recognition of numbers reached 84%, terminology 92%, and with names, of course, is a bit lower, but quite a very high level of precision to help interpreters in the booth. And there are myself and colleagues doing a lot of experimental research in this area, trying to see if interpreters can profit from this technology. Because one thing is to have a technology, the same for the translator before. The other thing is to see if this is useful in real life. And it seems the first experiments that the improvement of quality, for example, in this case of interpreting, is there, is statistically significant, and in some cases quite big. For example, in the case of numbers, which are quite a big problem often for interpreters. Of course, there are problems. Interpreters feels like an external cognitive load, we call it. So it's too much if you have to listen to interpreters and see the transcripts or this suggestion and so on. And there is a need to learn how to use it. So there is a lot of things to do. We are just in the initial phase of experimenting. But there is another area which is quite in common and that is the convergence of translation and interpreting, which is a live subtitling, which is also called a re-speaking, depending if it's in one language or if it's in more languages. I think you know probably what re-speaking is. It's just using listening to the source speech on TV and so on, and reproducing it in front of a mic, adapting the source text, And then we have the speech recognition, translating it into text, written text, then probably another stage of editing the translation, the transcription, and then producing it on a screen. It's used, of course, in a TV, but it's also used in conferences to have the possibility to make people to make the content accessible to impaired people. This is also moving slowly into interlingual live subtitle. Of course, it's happening in real time. This is the point in interlingual re-speaking, where there is also the translation component in it, or the interpreting component. Here is the convergence between the two professions, where there is the need of the interpreting skills to be very quick in reacting in the transferring into another language, but also the knowledge about subtitling, so a more translator job to produce not only a transcription, a long transcription, but to produce segmented and easily readable subtitles. This is the area which is quite new, the interlingual re-speaking, but which is quite interesting, and some universities, unfortunately not very many, are starting to teach this and to promote this kind of activity. What are the future perspectives? It's, in my opinion, it's clear that the quality of automatic speech recognition is now mature. We have demonstrated it, at least for some areas, some specific areas. I'm almost done. And it's supposed to increase, because we heard it yesterday. If you try it every 6 months, you see an increase in quality, which is, at least for now, continuing. Everybody's calling me that it's almost over. I'm almost there. The potential use of automatic speech recognition, both for translators, for interpreters, and for this new profession, means a change in landscape for the profession. We need from the university more empirical studies, and from the practitioners we need a bit an open mind to try things out for the benefit, of course, to see if this can fit interpreters, can fit translators, and so on. Of course, it's not a secret. My colleague before spoke about this. When we have a speech recognition, which is working quite well, and we have a machine translation, which is working quite well, the next step is to try to build a machine interpreting, speech-to-speech interpreting. This is quite new, but it's something which is coming. And I'm pretty sure this will come in the next years. Again, it's like a machine translation. It's not going to replace interpreters, like machine translation is not going to replace all interpreters, but it's going to have impact on our profession. So we have to be prepared to confront ourselves with these new technologies that are coming. And this is my part, have also to try to do it from the perspective of translators and interpreters, and not leave only to the technicians, to the machine learners, experts, this field, but should be our community that should learn about these things in order to assess it and be the multiplicator of when it's good to use it and when it's not good to use it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claudio. Focusing a bit on accents. I have to work on my own West Swedish accent, which is very strong. But now to Emma SKAGERBERG, who is a Manager of Technology Solutions in Semantix. She's going to talk to us about workflows and how we can solve all our processes. It's a very interesting and passionate subject. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see. So I'd like to share a few things that I've learned about workflow systems. And although this session is supposed to be about the future, I will not talk about any technology breakthroughs here. I'll try to instead give you some ideas on how to make efficient use of all the new technology that is out there. So this is what I'll talk about. bit about different kinds of workflows and selecting systems, and then I'll zoom in on the workflows handling translation and language services. But first, just a few words about myself. I work at Semantix, which is the largest language service provider in the Nordics. And my current challenge there is to implement a production workflow system in the company, along with a number of integrated systems. And so the examples I will mirror here will, the examples I will show will mirror how a standard LSP works, but I think some of it can be applied to other organizations as well. So we start with a simple question. What is a workflow? It can be something like this, of course. It would be the normal workflow in the translation industry. But it doesn't start there. We have to have someone who places the order, and of course we have to deliver it back to that same person or someone else. And if we look at it from the client's perspective, translation would only be a small part of the client's workflow. So the edit bubble here would represent the client's system or whatever they use to do their editions that they will then send to translation. And we might also want to follow up with the customer what we did and ask them if they liked it or not. So that's another bubble in the workflow. And as you know, files are not always perfect, so we need maybe to fix them before we send them to translation. And of course, we also, most of the time, we want to know the volume of what we want to translate. So we need to analyze it. And maybe we would add another step to include the customer in the workflow and send it for revision or review with the customer, which will trigger a new step to implement the changes from revision. What else do we have? Of course, we have to invoice the customer. That's the fun part. And do some bookkeeping on top of that and get some statistics out of it so that we know if we are doing well as a company or not. It's not certain that the client always wants to order after they get a quote, so we should have a process to handle quotes and which the client can accept or reject. And on top of that, we have a lot of technology as well to help us. And this adds even more complexity to an already complex workflow. And last but not least, we have vendors who invoice us. And that data must also come into the bookkeeping system and also statistics. And we have a small bubble also in the in the right bottom corner, which says handle customer relations. And that's a good idea. If you're selling something, you would probably have a system to log your meetings and phone calls and things like that. So that you might want to use that to have marketing automation based on that data as well. Right. So I'll go back. What do we do now when we have a workflow like this? How can we automate everything and find a system for it? I think I want to go back in history now and we should ask ourselves why we use computers in the first place. And even though we have a lot of things have happened with computers in the past 50 years, I would say that computers can still only do three things better than humans, and that is to do repeated tasks very, very fast. They can follow rules, probably better than humans can do, and they can also remember things. So when we look at automation, what can we actually automate? I need to find my papers about this. we should actually look for our repeated tasks and our processes that follow set rules. That's what you actually can automate. Anything is no use to automate. And in a company, when you would look for things to automate, you would start here in the finance department's workflow. And why is that? It's of course simple, because the finance team will have a lot of repeated tasks. They will have strict requirements and legal requirements to follow, and they are probably also documented, which is a good thing. But unfortunately, this means by that in many companies, you would let the finance team select a system. And this will mean that you would work in a company where the finance team has decided which system the project manager and the vendors and the clients should work in. So, but if you want to have a system and you have different departments with different requirements, how can you decide on one system? So the answer is that you probably can't do that. Instead, you could have a strategy that looks like this. You would have different roles working in different systems, and instead you integrate these different systems with each other and exchange data between them. And it doesn't have to look like this. You could work like this if you don't want to have a client portal or a sales system, or you could combine the different system in different ways and integrate the data you need. But the point I'm trying to make here is that you need to break it down into modules. You can't look at the entire workflow. So in this picture, just to exemplify what I'm trying to say is that the translation system would be something like a CAT tool or machine translation service. A customer portal could be something that comes from the production system or a web page or something that you built. A sales system, there are a million of CRM systems out there. Finance systems, likewise, accounting systems can be found anywhere. Production systems are, in our industry, are many times built. You build them on your own, or you buy one of the two big ones, which is XDRF and Plunet. But it doesn't really matter. You should choose the one that suits you. And just a short note about integrations. If you integrate systems, you should try to keep them to a minimum. Keep the data that is exchanged to a minimum. That will help you if you, for example, need to keep track of where the data is in GDPR or for security reasons. That's a good thing. And it also helps when you want to change a system that you don't have too much data that is integrated. So, but let's go to the second part and how to find the best production system for the translation language industry. How do you do that? Well, you should do what the finance team is good at and actually find and define your repeated tasks and create your own set of rules and processes. And it's quite easy because you would know your organization. So you have to dig into the statistics and ask your colleagues what they actually do and keep track of that. And once you have defined this, you will know where you need to automate things, and thereby you will also be able to choose a system that is fit for your organization. And if you're lucky, you might end up with a good workflow system that is built for the language service industry so that you can build workflows like this. And you will probably have a lot of things to help you as well, which is included in the system. It could be a customer portal. You would have automatic sending of email notifications. You would have a vendor portal and databases connected to that. And automatic jobs that could help you create own automations that are not in there. And integrations to different translation tools. So, but just deciding on a system and then migrating customer and vendor data won't be enough because workflows can be quite tricky to build in a system like this. So what do you have to do then? Well, if you have a workflow system, you basically have something that is similar to a car factory. A car producer with a factory would always define a number of models and then define a few properties that these models can have. And as a consumer, you couldn't choose on any color. You would only choose from the 20 that this model holds. So all the properties are limited to what the factory line actually can produce. And if you would want something outside of the standard standard selections, you can't build the car in that factory line, and the price will be much higher. So the same goes for the language industry. You will have to define your standard language services and define which properties they can have. If someone wants something else, it should go outside of the workflow line and probably also have a higher price. So once you have set your services, the fun part actually starts, finally, so that you can build your workflows and start to automate things. You could have a workflow like this, where you would have 3 automatic jobs and 2 manual jobs, where the fixed files job could, for example, be an automatic job that would call a script that you created to fix a certain file type that you often get before it is sent to a CAT tool. And then it would call a CAT tool to analyze the files to get the volume, and then you would probably have some kind of send request thing in the system that you bought that would send out the job to a suitable vendor or group of vendors, if you define that. Or a variation could be to instead have one manual job and first send it to a machine translation service, and then a fully automatic job workflow. Or you could go for doing the technical work manually and only have machine translation applied. So this would be your language service factory. And if you're using a workflow system this way, you will have endless possibility to automate all your services that you offer your customers, as long as they are defined. But I just want to say something here about the number of automated tasks versus manual tasks. It seems that many jobs here are now replaced by robots, but it will still require people to configure and maintain a workflow system and also the processes that you have defined. So you should hold on to all your personnel who like to work with processes and all your tech-savvy personnel and developers, because you will need them if you have a system like this. And it's not about replacing linguists with technicians or developers. It's more a question of letting linguists do linguist work and not having translators dealing with technical files and technical problems. So,
Almost.
Yeah, I have my last slide. So in the first part, we talked about the big workflows, and the thing there is that you should include all parts of your organization when you select a system. And if you can't find one system that will do everything, you would have to break it down in modules and work with integrations instead. And you should exchange as little data as possible and keep the exchange to a minimum, if you can. And from the second part, you will have to look for your repeated tasks and define your rules and processes before you go shopping for a system. And you have to remember that if it's not repeated, you can't automate it. You should think like a car manufacturer. And if you automate things, you will need technical people in your organization. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Emma. It was not easy to make a living and passionate presentation about workflow processes, but you actually did it. And as somebody said on Slido, efficient workflow underpins efficient translation. And you articulated that very well. So can I ask Konstantin DRANCH, localization industry researcher, to take the scene and talk to us about Europe's role in language technology.
I'll try to take 10 minutes, but I'll need your help a little bit. Good morning. Okay, yes. Report, excellent. So our industry started as a industry of linguists. As the projects became more complex, then project managers took over. They took the power. And I think it's already evident who is the next generation of power mongers in this industry. It's the engineers. If they didn't seize the power yet, they're going to do it in the next 10 years, definitely. My question today for you is, which engineers? Are they going to be European engineers, American, Chinese, or Russian engineers? When working in NIMSI, before founding my own company, I made this infographic, and it summarizes on one page that you can print and put above your computer in your workplace all of the important language technology that you can use in your work. Translation tools, CAD tools, interpreting tools, tools for subtitling, dubbing, machine translation, and even marketplaces where you can get work. So I made all that, and it ended up at about 560 tools that I could map. There might be more, there might be 1,000, but 560 is, I think, good enough for anyone. If it's not enough for you. So what I did next is I checked each tool that mattered and put it by geography. I think the formatting is broken a little bit, but you can see which country or which part of the world makes the most tools. And on top of that, I added some score. So let's say if a tool is big and everyone's using it, aka SDL Trados, MemoQ, MemSource, whatever, then they had a high score. If it's a tool that exists but no one uses that, then it was just the one. And you can see that Europe is the definitive leader in language technology, far ahead of the United States and far ahead of Asia. But this is not forever. This leadership position, something that Europe has now, is threatened. It's good to have this leadership position. It creates jobs and it creates clusters of knowledge. For example, American company TransPerfect has a cluster of 100 engineers working from Serbia, developing their language technology from Europe. Another company, Lilt, has a development center in Munich. So, very good. It's jobs, it's taxes, and it's knowledge centers. In the future, however, what I want to say, it might not be so. I'm just flipping the slides. I'll be fast. Why? First, everything is going to be transformed from completely human tasks into post-editing tasks. Not only machine translation post-editing, you can see subtitle post-editing, data post-editing, transcription post-editing. So the computers make the first pass, and then the linguists do the second. So this technology has to come from some kind of AI companies. And AI companies currently concentrate in the United States and in China. These are the search engine companies and the companies that make this cloud, where you can train models for speech recognition, for machine translation, for semantic analysis, for summarization, and all kinds of other tasks. The United States have quite a few of them. Asia has quite a few of them. Europe's role is not very clear. There are some companies, but not as big. Second, these companies in the United States and in China have better access to funding. If you look at the most funded IT companies in the language industry, they all have a United States component. Even Anbabo, the Portuguese company, they got most of the funding from the United States. The Chinese companies get lots of money from the government. So unless something is done, by 2030, Europe's role as a leader in language technology might erode. What could be done? I conducted some rogue research with a volunteer group. It's probably a subject not for a row group, but for a professional group from the European Commission, but we made some suggestions. We took about 85 projects financed in the Horizon 2020 program, about 200 million that the European Commission allocated to language technology over the last 10 years. We looked at the projects that were completed, and we had a very simple set of criteria. Is this a project that survives today? Is it useful for European competitiveness? Are there live users from the language industry? Are there live users from outside the language industry? And the result was that about 37 projects in our sample were successful. For innovation, it's not bad. It's actually a very good score because most of the innovation, maybe 80% of innovation dies. But still, I think that could be improved. Then we looked at how the money was distributed, and the outcome was that most of the money went to the academia, to the great research facilities of the European Union. The German Center for Artificial Intelligence, the Italian Fondazione Bruno Kessler. This is in this sample because, of course, they get much more. I think University of Edinburgh got 200 million from the European Commission of the last 10 years. So a lot of money went into this research and development, but most of this went to the academia. And the problem with academic research is that it doesn't always connect. There is a chasm between just development to create a product and connecting that product with the market. So if you look at successful today, companies of today, IT companies that run those technologies that are used everywhere. For example, SDL Tradus is used in China. None of the Chinese tools are used here. No, is there anyone here who works in a Chinese tool like YiCat or Jima? That's what I thought, right? No one's using that, right? But in China, there are maybe hundreds of thousands of users of that. Coming back to us. So when you create a product, you have to connect it with the market. You have to sell it. A company behind Trados or MemSource or MemoQ would have 40%, 50% of their staff devoted to distribution. But the academic projects, they focus on just developing the product. They specify it years ahead of time. They create it, then they put it in an online repository. The work is done. But no, right? The product has to connect with the market. People have to use it. Ondřej presented a really interesting machine translation system today, or automatic speech recognition system. How many knew about that system before? If it was a commercial company, if it was someone trying to commercialize their product, you would know. So what I suggest is very simple. Let me come back, and it's going to be the last slide. Every project that has to receive funding from the European Commission to advance language technology, and I think that should be done, because in the future we want to maintain the leadership position. It's something valuable and has to be protected. Every project has to have a distribution component. There has to be a commercial partner in the mix interested in putting out that project to the public, connecting it with the market. You don't just develop in isolation. You develop it by listening to the feedback of the industry. You try to sell, and if it doesn't sell, maybe you adjust something. That's the main suggestion. The second suggestion, of course, to review this kind of work to see how it's going and maybe draw some conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you for also keeping the promises about the 10 minutes and clearly highlighting what we call also in the research arena the valley of death, connecting product with the market, and it's very difficult. So now we have around half an hour, 20 minutes for comments and questions, and I will open up directly from the floor just to say that we all have here heard excellent presentations and also some controversial statements. I will just read them out so we get some discussion going here. Everything transformed into post-editing tasks. Konstantin. Automation is key to efficient translation. Convergence between interpretation and translation. Machine translation is indistinguishable from human translation. Just to give you a little bit of, shall we say, ingredients for a good discussion. But let's take some questions here first. I had one. Yes, go ahead. Say your name and your question.
Thank you. My name is Alexander Bondarenko, and I'm from Ukraine, Translatel company. So my question is to Konstantin. As far as we can see, Europe is doing quite well in translation technology now. Yet, we at Europe care not only about technology, but also about ethics. So we have GDPR that prohibits to use the personal data for any metadata processing, as including the empty training engines. So on the other hand, in some other parts of the world, for example, you mentioned China, they are not that much over scrupulous about GDPR and the laws like that. So their engines now are almost as good as the European engines and sometimes are even better. So the question is, won't we lose this technological battle if we go on like the same and continue to obey the personal data and other personal rights like we are doing now? And where is the line which cannot be crossed when the progress is at stake? Thank you.
Just talk, yes.
Just start talking, right? Well, I don't think the translation industry can defeat the GDPR to collect data from users in hopes that to make language engines better. People can do it illegally, of course, and let's put hands down, they do this. There's no line, draw your own line. I mean, if you're very ethical, don't use the data and let the Chinese win.
Just to say on GDPR, the issue here is about anonymizing the data. That's the issue. If you do that, you can use it any way you want.
Every part of the world has something, right? The American Cloud Act, and in China, the data restrictions are maybe not about the person, but about the state, right? You can't get too much data out of China.
Okay. We had a question from Slido as well, just to explain neuro-machine translation for you, Ondřej, in 3 sentences.
In 3 sentences. I have 3 slides that explain deep neural networks.
3 sentences. Even one.
It's 50 million parameters, real numbers, that are automatically trained so that the system best converts the source sequence of words into the target sequence of words. Many millions of combinations of these numbers, of the values, are tried out during the training until it stabilizes so that it delivers the best performance on the test set, and that's it. So it's 50 million numbers that start at random and get stabilized by looking at the source and expected target data.
Okay, I hope that was understandable. Konstantin, your try.
It will not be technically correct, but neural machine translation is the machine translation that functions similarly to a human brain and translates more fluently. It's the next generation of MT, which is going to kick off first all the older generations of MT and then eventually all the human translators.
Very good. Yeah, it's about contextualizing. Questions from the floor. Otherwise, we can go to some questions from Slido. Yes, over here.
So Katja May from the European Commission. I would have 2 very specific methodological questions to Ondřej and Claudio, and then a short question to Emma as well. So I wanted to ask Ondřej, so you mentioned when you had the experiment on machine translation of full documents, you said the evaluation was done by domain experts. I would like to know, was it a bilingual evaluation, and were they asked to evaluate fluency as well as adequacy? And then for Claudio, I wanted to know, you mentioned the interpret bank experiment, and here also I would like to know, you mentioned that you had tests with interpreters. I would like to know, were these professional interpreters or was it students? And to Emma, I wanted to know, so you shared an overview and advice. Would you have any examples to share on practical experience and on the impact of this on everyday work? Thank you.
We start with Claudio, and then Emma, and last Ondřej.
Okay. Oh. Okay. The experiments of using automatic speech recognition for interpreters have been done at 3 different universities. with the 3 different tools or simulation of tools, sometimes with the tools we have seen here, sometimes with just a simulation to have a perfect rendition of the inputs, just to have a setting that is scientific. The tests have been done in all cases by students, in all universities. This is a big problem in interpreting research at any university on any topic, that it's very difficult to gain professional interpreters to take part at this test. So we start with students in Rome, in Ghent, here in Germersheim at my university.
Okay, I can talk about our vendor invoicing process that we created, which I really like, and many of our vendors as well. The example is that when finance defined the process, they thought that the vendors would send 1 invoice per job that they created. But of course, you realize that's not possible when you do a 3-word translation to send 1 invoice per job. But they really wanted it to have it like that. But we said, no, we can't do it like that. So instead, we collect all the jobs that one vendor does for one legal entity within our organization, and they would get a specification each month or each week, depending on how many jobs they do. And they create invoices themselves based on our specification, or mention if there are incorrect things on the specification, we would of course have a discussion. But it works really well, and it automatically registers the number of the vendor's invoice on the correct job. So it's automatic both for vendors and finance departments.
Yeah. And now to the evaluation or test sets. So the main message I wanted to say is that it's always very clearly written out in the respective research paper. For us, the details, how the test set was created, how it was evaluated, is not even a fine print. It is the necessary ingredient in the paper. It becomes fine print only when the result somehow leaks to the news. But it's part of our research. And the audit reports, there was also a question on the source. The source was created by standard translation agencies, and then it was revised at the Supreme Audit institutions that actually conducted the joint audit, and then it was revised for content by people knowing both the source and target languages and working in the domain, so that was super high quality of translation, revised by the authors. So there was a collaboration between translators and the authors of those documents, and that happened 5 years ago, so there was some delay. And the assessment then was by people knowing both the source and target languages. That's that. The news translation where we saw the parity in terms of sentences, that is sent to standard translation agencies and standardly revised. It's not premium at all, but it's something that a normal company would afford as a translation quality. So it's not some baseline lay student translation. It is the medium or the standard thing. Yeah.
Thank you. So further questions from the floor, or we take a few more Slido, and I have myself a couple of questions as well. Just going back to Emma, perhaps. There was a question on Slido, and I had the same question. Why is it important to keep the data exchange low between systems?
Because that will make things so much easier for the people managing the system and the integration. If you ask a user of a system that, okay, now we're having 2 modules and 2 systems instead of 1, most of the users will say, no, I actually need that data. Or if you say that, okay, we need to archive data now, how many years do you need to save? And most of the users will say, well, I need all my data, you can't remove anything. But in the real world, you can't have it like that. You have to set limits. And I'm not saying you shouldn't integrate a lot of information. You might need it in 2 systems, but you should really think about it before you just integrate all the data.
Very good, thanks for the reply. Now to Ondřej, the comment here from Slido from a fellow called Chris Durbin. So curious about the comment that machine translation is excellent for texts with no special terminology. My experience is that that is the stumbling block.
The standard and simple answer is it's data in general. So if the training data differs in the style from the test data, then style will be in which you suffer. Since we are trying to gather for translation data from all the possible sources, including subtitles, for example, I have not seen so much issues with the style, but that's also related to the test sets that we are using, and the test sets in our case were mainly news articles. If I was translating, belletry, then obviously I would run into other issues.
Many of the different panel members have highlighted the issue of data. And I'd like to ask a question to Claudio, perhaps, about the data. How do we improve the data curation? How do we get better data for the different experiences that you are doing, the different projects that you are doing? Ondřej raised it as well, I think Konstantin as well, and of course Emma obviously also works almost exclusively with different data. So, but Claudio.
Yes, but probably I'm not the best person to answer this question, but I think we have heard it a lot of time yesterday. There is a need to convergence between our profession, the translation and interpreting, and the institutions for with the technology side to have more access and easily access. In this case, is the European Union a very good example of providing access to a lot of data, open access to a lot of data. And the problem that I think many industry has is to have access to open data, the question of openness of access to data in order to start then all the next steps, which are increasing quality, assessing quality, and so on. But the first step is to have access to open data, and this respect institutions and public institutions should do more, not only the European institution, and probably also the industry, if they are very interested in this technology, should be more open to give access to data.
Konstantin, you want to come in as well?
My view on this is you put the academics to work. Give you an example. There's a Chinese company which specializes in collecting data for European languages. They signed up many partnership agreements with the universities, because universities and the public sector institutions, they have years of collected data on parallel texts. So they signed up. In the cases with universities, I think they exchanged the data for a few internships for students. Maybe they paid some money, but that's how they got to build very good engines for European languages. And there are projects already in Europe to centralize translation data used by the public sector institutions and universities. Maybe there should be more attention paid to that side of the data, because data is like, it's too much of it, and it's in many different boxes. Choose the biggest one and see what's going on there.
So it's an issue about quantity and quality as well, then I would guess.
Quantity, quality, who do we give access to this data to, and how do we leverage it?
The last question, unless we have something from the... yes, sorry, we have something from the floor. Go ahead, please.
One question to Emma. You talked about Pluna and XDR. Could you perhaps give your opinion on why there's only two translation management systems that can be used for each CAT tool? So they are now not CAT tool based. Why is it that only are two in the whole market? Because this seems to me very few tools for such a demand.
Yeah, I don't think I can answer that. But you, Konstantin, said you have 20?
There are many more. There's LBS, FlowFit, translation projects, Quahil, QTRM, Protimos, and Alice, and so on. There's many more.
And they are all connected to CAT tools?
To different CAT tools. Some of them are connected, some of them are poorly connected. It depends on the system. Right. Just that the market knows the biggest of the biggest ones, and the rest are somewhat smaller. It depends on the salespeople, right? If a company has many salespeople and a lot of marketing activity, it connects to the market, then you know about it. If they don't, then...
I also think that you will see a lot of these systems connecting to more CAT tools as well, with new APIs coming and easier ways of...
If I may, for 30 seconds, I also have an opinion on that, and that goes along with what you said, Konstantin. How come the university projects are not commercialized? And I think the answer to that is that there's no market. Companies are not willing to pay for this. So how are you going to do this?
Have you tried?
Last question then. As I said, I had a question to each of the panel members. So for Konstantin, the last one. You talked about the EU leadership in language technology. How do we keep it?
It's not an easy question to answer, and it wouldn't be possible to answer it in just 1 minute. And I think it has to be an issue raised on a wholly different level. In my opinion, today it's more important to connect the technology to the market than to develop it. So there has to be more effort made into helping to promote European language technology, to help it make it through the early stage to an advanced stage where they can build their own sales globally. It's the market and sales effort, it's the popularization effort, distribution effort that has to have help.
Very good. So I'd like to thank the panel and the panel members, because they have really given us insights. So we respected the title, we respected the time. So a big applause to the panel members. Thank you very much.
Bien, merci à tous. Il me revient.
Thank you to everybody. Now I have the burdensome task of announcing the coffee break, which will take place until